Today, we are going to talk about a crisis that is silently destroying lives, shaking cities, and pushing an entire nation toward unrest. Iran is facing one of the worst water shortages in its modern history, and this crisis is no longer just about dry taps or empty reservoirs. It has become a trigger for anger, protests, and a growing sense of betrayal among ordinary people. From villages to major cities, water scarcity has turned daily survival into a struggle and transformed frustration into open resistance. Across Iran, people wake up not knowing whether water will come from the tap or not. In many areas, water flows for only a few hours a day, while in others it has completely stopped. Families store water in buckets, tanks, and bottles, constantly worried about running out. Farmers stare at cracked soil where crops once grew, knowing that months of hard work have been destroyed by a lack of water. This is not a sudden natural disaster, but the result of years of decisions that ignored warnings and prioritized politics over people. Iran is not a country unfamiliar with dry climates. For centuries, its people adapted to limited water through careful management and traditional systems. But in recent decades, rapid population growth, uncontrolled urban expansion, and aggressive dam construction have pushed the country beyond its limits. Rivers that once flowed freely have been diverted or dried up. Lakes have shrunk to a fraction of their former size. Underground water reserves have been over-extracted, causing land to sink and wells to collapse. One of the most painful examples is Lake Urmia, once one of the largest saltwater lakes in the region. Today, much of it has turned into a white desert of salt. What happened there is not just an environmental tragedy, but a symbol of national failure. Experts warned for years that diverting rivers feeding the lake would cause irreversible damage, but those warnings were ignored. Now, surrounding communities face health problems, economic collapse, and forced migration. In rural areas, the water crisis has destroyed livelihoods. Farmers who depended on irrigation can no longer grow wheat, rice, or fruits. Livestock die because there is no water to drink. Villages that existed for generations are being abandoned as people move to cities in search of work and basic services. This mass migration puts even more pressure on urban infrastructure, worsening water shortages in cities that are already struggling. In cities like Tehran, Isfahan, Alvaz, and Shiraz, residents experience water cuts that disrupt daily life. Schools, hospitals, and factories are affected. Small businesses that rely on water, such as restaurants, bakeries, and laundries, suffer losses. When people cannot bathe clean or cook properly, dignity itself feels under attack. Over time, this constant stress builds anger, especially when officials downplay the crisis or offer empty promises. Alvaz, in particular, has become a flashpoint. Located in Khuzestan province, an area rich in oil and gas, the city ironically lacks clean drinking water. Residents have protested repeatedly, chanting slogans against local authorities and the central government. For them, the injustice feels unbearable. They live atop vast natural resources, yet they cannot access something as basic as water. Security forces have often responded with force, further deepening resentment. The protests are not only about water. Water has become the spark that ignites deeper grievances. High unemployment, rising food prices, inflation, and corruption all feed into public anger. When people see billions spent on foreign conflicts or large infrastructure projects while their own taps run dry, they feel abandoned. The water crisis exposes a gap between the state and the people, a gap that grows wider with each dry day. Government officials often blame climate change and drought, and while climate change is real and severe, it is not the full story. Mismanagement plays a central role. Large dams were built without proper environmental studies. Water-intensive crops were encouraged in dry regions. Powerful institutions controlled water resources with little transparency or accountability. Ordinary citizens paid the price for these decisions. Another major issue is groundwater depletion. As surface water became scarce, wells were drilled deeper and deeper. In many areas, groundwater extraction exceeded natural recharge rates. This caused the land to sink, damaging homes, roads, and infrastructure. Once groundwater is depleted, it can take decades or centuries to recover, if it recovers at all, yet regulation remained weak, and illegal wells continued to operate. The social impact of water scarcity is profound. Women often bear the burden of managing water at home, spending hours collecting and storing it. Children miss school when water shortages disrupt sanitation. Health risks increase as people use unsafe water sources. Tensions rise within communities as neighbors compete for limited supplies. What begins as an environmental issue quickly becomes a social crisis. As protests spread, slogans increasingly target the system itself. People chant against corruption, mismanagement, and broken promises. Water protests have merged with broader demonstrations calling for change. In some cases, workers from different sectors, including farmers, factory workers, and teachers, have joined together, united by shared frustration. This unity worries authorities, who fear that localized protests could turn into a nationwide movement. The state's response has often been reactive rather than strategic. Temporary water tankers are sent to affected areas. Officials make visits and announce emergency plans, but long-term solutions remain unclear. Trust has eroded to the point where many people no longer believe official statements. Each failed promise fuels more anger and deepens the sense of crisis. International sanctions have also played a role by limiting access to technology and investment needed for modern water management. However, critics argue that sanctions cannot explain decades of poor planning. Countries with fewer resources have managed water more sustainably through conservation, recycling, and public awareness. In Iran, such measures were often delayed or implemented unevenly. The water crisis also affects Iran's future stability. When basic needs are not met, legitimacy weakens. History shows that environmental stress can contribute to political upheaval, especially when combined with economic hardship. Water shortages undermine agriculture, increase food prices, and strain state resources. Over time, this creates a cycle of instability that is difficult to break. Young people, in particular, feel hopeless. Many see no future in farming or local industries destroyed by water scarcity. Migration, unemployment, and despair feed social unrest. When a generation feels it has nothing to lose, protests become more intense and unpredictable. The water crisis thus becomes a generational issue, shaping attitudes toward authority and the future. There are solutions, but they require political will and transparency. Water-intensive agriculture must be reformed. Crops suited to dry climates should replace those that consume excessive water. Modern irrigation techniques can reduce waste. Urban water recycling and desalination, though costly, can help in coastal areas. Most importantly, decision-making must involve local communities and experts rather than powerful institutions acting alone. Public awareness is also crucial. Conservation cannot succeed without trust and cooperation. People are more willing to save water when they believe sacrifices are shared fairly and corruption is addressed. Without that trust, even the best technical solutions may fail. As the crisis deepens, Iran stands at a crossroads. It can continue on the current path, treating water shortages as temporary emergencies, or it can confront the root causes with honesty and reform. The choice will shape not only the environment but also the country's social and political future. What is happening in Iran is a warning to the world. Water scarcity is not a distant threat. It is a present reality that can destabilize societies. When governments ignore environmental limits and public concerns, consequences follow. Empty taps can lead to empty fields, empty wallets, and eventually empty promises. The people protesting in the streets are not asking for luxury. They are asking for water, dignity, and a future. Their voices echo through dry cities and abandoned villages, reminding us that access to water is not just a resource issue but a human right. How Iran responds to this crisis will determine whether those voices are silenced or finally heard. As we continue to follow this unfolding situation, one thing is clear: the water crisis is no longer hidden beneath the surface. It is visible in the cracks of the earth, the anger of the streets, and the uncertainty of millions of lives. And until real change happens, the protests are unlikely to stop.